What do you do when it feels like nothing is going your way? When it feels like everything is against you, the world is opposed to you. When situations are beyond your control and it just seems like it's getting worse and you feel helpless or you feel powerless. And people are saying things about you maybe that aren't true. You're trying to protect your reputation. You stand to lose everything and it seems like everybody else has the upper hand. And I don't know what that may look like for you in your lives. But I do know that when it comes to the power that the world provides, Jesus says that we are supposed to be different. We are not supposed to have worldly power. We are not supposed to have worldly influence or worldly affluence. We are supposed to have otherworldly priorities. So, whenever you say, I am a follower of Jesus, you are saying that in this world, I will not have worldly power like the world strives for. So, we should all experience at some point, man, I feel like a salmon swimming upstream. It feels like the world is opposed to me. It's because the world is going a different direction. So, what do you do when things feel like they are out of your control? We're going to look at Jesus and his trial before the high priest and the religious leaders. We've been going through the life of Christ all year long. And this is the time where there is a whole lot of suffering going on. There's a lot of endurance, a lot of pain, a lot of crisis that is happening. So if you're going through that right now, I just want you to know we planned this sermon a long time ago. This is just the point in Jesus' life where he is going through difficult times. So how did he respond? How did his followers respond? And we're going to compare and contrast these two. What did Jesus do? Remember your 90s bracelet. What would Jesus do whenever everything seems like it's going against you? And then we're also going to look at one of his followers in particular, Peter. And then we're going to ask, which one of these is more like what I do when problems happen? So let's get to the stories from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to be in all over the Gospels. Those who had arrested Jesus, this is from the garden. We were just there last week. They took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. And that little the ellipsis there, those three dots, there's a note there that Peter follows Jesus to see what's going on. And the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Well, Jesus is so above reproach that they could not even make up stories against him that proved to be true. So he had fantastic integrity. If you want to know how to handle opposition when something comes your way, you should probably have the same integrity of Jesus so that when people falsely say things against you, it's so proven to be false because it's so out of your character, because it's not like the character of Jesus. They would never do that. They are followers of the world. And yet, here at this trial, they have this trial under the cover of darkness. They knew that they could not do anything against Jesus in the light because he was popular with the people. Everybody loved him. And they knew that if they arrested him, the people would riot. So they wanted to take down a popular man, which was an unpopular move. So they had to do it at an unpopular time of night where nobody would be there to see their behavior. And Jesus says, all of my teaching I did in the daylight. I've got nothing to hide. He's comparing his words in the daylight with their actions in the darkness. He says, I have nothing to hide. So if you want to know what to handle, how to handle a crisis or a situation where everybody seems like they're against you, don't have any self-inflicted wounds where you're trying to cover something up. May everything that we do be done in the light. But they were afraid. And so they tried to not just come up with any evidence, they tried to make false witnesses. Now, I'm pretty sure that in those 10 commandments, remember those from your days in Sunday school? Helpful to revisit those every once in a while. There's one in there where you're not supposed to lie. You're not supposed to bear false witness. And these are the teachers of the law, the ones who are supposed to be upholding this truth for the whole nation of Israel. And they're so corrupt and against Jesus that they try to break this commandment and bring false witnesses, looking for false evidence to kill him, meaning they had murderous intent. Then some stood up and did give this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Yet even their testimony did not agree. This is a false testimony because it's actually a misquoting of Jesus' words. Whenever Jesus flipped over the tables in the temple and he drove out the people that were just abusing the sacrificial system for their own gain, we read in John that he was asked by these Jewish leaders. They responded to him, what sign can you show us to prove your authority to tell us that we're doing this wrong? And this was what Jesus said. Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days. Now, do you remember what the false witnesses said? We heard him say, I will destroy this temple. Is that what Jesus said? That's not what Jesus said. He didn't say, I will destroy this temple. He wanted this temple to be pure so that people could make their sacrifices as a picture of the sacrifice, the pure sacrifice that he was going to make. So he didn't say, I will destroy this temple. He said, if you destroy this temple, I will raise it again in 3 days. And they were very confused. They replied, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days? But, and this is key, the temple he had spoken of was his body. He wasn't talking about the temple where the sacrificial system of the Old Testament was happening. He was talking about his body. And so whenever the false witnesses misquoted him, of course, they were saying, well, I don't know. That's not exactly how he said it. So even their false witnesses could not come up with a good testimony. And then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent. You want to know what to do sometimes whenever you're experiencing a crisis and everybody's against you? Maybe you were given 2 lips, 2 sets of teeth to be like a cage to cover your tongue. Maybe sometimes if you're in a crisis or you're facing opposition, just don't say anything. But sometimes we feel like we have to prove ourselves. You don't have to incriminate yourself. What's that saying? Don't cop to a felony if they only have you on a misdemeanor, right? We have the right to remain silent, but not all of us have the ability. Sometimes when you say something, it can make the situation worse. Jesus, in his wisdom, knows that this is not something that he needs to answer. He remained silent and gave no answer. And again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? Do you see how now the question is asked differently? Jesus does not have to incriminate himself. How many of you in here were of the age where you grew up, when you had a sick day at school or something, you would watch Judge Judy on TV, okay? Or you know what Judge Judy is, right? Judge Judy is a fantastic court TV drama where 2 sides come in and they lay their case before all the cameras in the whole world to see. And Judge Judy makes a decision within 30 minutes, right? We want to get this done really quick. I brought a clip with me, a video of one of the shortest cases she ever had. It was lost in 26 seconds. Because there was a woman who was saying, I had these items stolen from me. These other people stole my wallet. And so let's just see how this whole situation handled out. Again, don't have to self-incriminate.
My wallet.
What was in your wallet?
It was $50.
Okay.
I had to replace all my IDs. I had gift cards in there, my earpiece, and a calculator.
There was no earpiece in the mail.
Judgment for the plaintiff for the amount of $500. That's what I think it's worth, madam. Goodbye.
A very short episode. They stole my wallet. No, it didn't have that in there. Oh, you just. Oh, wow. This would be an unwise situation when you're facing opposition. Sometimes the best thing you can say is nothing at all. But Jesus was asked a very important question. It wasn't just about the misunderstanding of his teaching. This was the core question of who he is, which is the core reason that he came. Are you the Messiah? Are you the blessed one? Now that's a question that Jesus could not answer. This would be lying by omission, by remaining silent. So if you aren't speaking the truth, you're lying in silence. And this is what Jesus said, I am. Now, that's a pretty big sentence of Yahweh. That I am sentence just keeps making its way through Scripture. And he says, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus, if he denied being the Messiah, they could have used that against him too. Are you the Messiah? And if he wanted to just get out of that problem, I just want this trial to end. I just want this to go away. He could have said, no, don't worry about me. And then they would have gone to the people and said, we have witnesses that he denied being the Messiah. So don't cut bait in a crisis. Stand for what is true. This is what Jesus is doing. He was silent during the persecution and the false accusations, but he stood for the truth. Why do we get that backwards? Why do we so often want to respond immediately to the false accusations, but when people ask us to stand for the truth, that's when we're quiet? Jesus did it the right way. We don't need to be silent on the truth of who Jesus is. Sometimes whenever people give us those false accusations, that's when we're ready to rumble. Have the patience that Jesus had. Jesus stood for the truth of who he was, and we should also stand for the truth of who he is. And the Old Testament Bible verses that Jesus is referencing here, he answers that this answer shook the whole room of these religious leaders at the time. First, talking about the Son of Man seated at the right hand. This was written by David in Psalm 110. David, King David. This is what they're all trying to get back to, the throne of David that will last forever. And David writes, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Now imagine you're on trial and you say, I will sit at the Father's right hand. What does that say about everybody else in the room? There's only two pieces of furniture here in this verse. So if he's on the throne, what does that make them? Oh, you think they like that? No, they did not like that. He's saying, I will be seated and you will be feated. You're going to be heaven's ottoman. You are the enemies who are going to be put into submission. He's talking to the high priest. Now, this high priest, this is supposed to be a lifetime position, but this is a powerful family. Rome realized that the high priests of the Israelites got more and more powerful as he got older. So they would, every once in a while, just sort of recycle, say, you know, we need a new high priest. We need a new high priest. Annas, the high priest before Caiaphas here that Jesus is talking to, held the position for a few years, which was very rare. But then he gave it to his son, Caiaphas. And they would also give it, try to keep this high priesthood in the family. All right, this nepotism at the high priesthood. So this is a very powerful religious crime boss kind of family. And Jesus goes right to them and says, you are the ones who are the enemy. The high priest was more important than the puppet king Herod in the eyes of the Israelites. So Jesus here quotes a psalm, not just any psalm, a psalm from a king, and not just any king, King David. He also quotes a prophet, Daniel. We've already read some of the words of Daniel today. Daniel was a very mighty prophet. At the days when the Israelites were in captivity and they were coming back, during Daniel's lifetime, they were released. And what did they build? They rebuilt a temple. So Jesus also quoting Daniel here, this vision, whenever he's coming on the clouds. In my vision, Daniel says, at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancients of Days and was led into his presence. Now, whenever we think about the coming on the clouds, right, we tend to read that like a 21st century American church about him coming back. Which direction is the Son of Man headed? On the clouds, he is headed toward the throne room. So what is Jesus saying here? He's saying, what you are intending for evil is exactly how I'm going to get my authority. So don't be afraid when people oppose you. When you are opposed, you know you're headed the right direction in the authority of the blessed one. And then Daniel continues, he was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All the nations and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And I'm glad Jesus quoted these words, because that old system, thankfully, is done away with. He fulfilled that law. And now you and I, we don't have to travel all the way around the world with a lamb to sacrifice every year, because that lamb was sacrificed for us once and for all. And the high priest is here trying to hold on to his power. Imagine trying to be in a power struggle with Jesus. Jesus, whenever he's in this crisis, he's in this mode, He does not deny who he is. And so whenever you're in a situation that you're facing, whatever it is, do not deny whose you are. You need to stand in the truth of who Jesus is, because if you buckle on that, you will buckle on anything that opposes you. But if you stand in a kingdom that has no end, with a power that is above all other powers, you can withstand any situation that comes your way. Know whose you are. And then suddenly everything changes for you. It doesn't matter what everybody says around you because you're secure. We like to say around here that we want people to have restored identities in Jesus so that when you know who you are in Christ, suddenly you live in the world differently. You think differently. You speak differently. You act differently, regardless of all the stuff that people try to throw at you. These other people, how did they respond? How did the high priest respond? Did he take that well? Did he say, interesting theological point there, Jesus? No, sometimes when you speak the truth to people, they're going to get more mad. But their reaction does not change the truth of Scripture. Don't be so worried about what other people think. Worry about what God thinks. Don't worry about men who hate you. Fear God who loves you. Do what he says. So this is what the high priest does. The high priest tore his clothes, a huge sign of mourning. Why do we need any more witnesses? He asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him as worthy of death, and he would be worthy of death if it weren't true. But because he is truly the Messiah, the blessed one, everybody else, the enemies, are making a huge universal mistake. Whenever you're facing opposition, let your opposition make the mistake, not you. And don't let anybody tell you that Jesus never claimed to be God either. I think he was just a good teacher. They didn't kill him because he was a good teacher. They would have promoted him. But he claimed to be the Son of Man. And in the case of a capital crime in Jesus' time and place, the sentence was never carried out on the same day as the conviction. They wanted cooler heads to prevail, right? You have the right to a speedy trial, right? You have the right to a slow trial. We want, just in case there's evidence that comes out. Killing somebody or putting somebody to death is a very serious thing, so we want to make sure. So everybody would take a night to cool off, but they had Jesus right where they wanted him. They weren't going to take any more time. They had him. So they went through a sham trial, they railroaded Jesus, and even in the midst of chaos, other people rush to judgment and punishment. Don't be too hasty. Jesus, however, has great patience. That bad behavior didn't end with the false conviction, because I like what Luke said. They said many other insulting things to him. And I like that it's broad. I like that it didn't get too specific, because it doesn't matter what they say. It can be anything, it could be many things, it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter if they insult your mama. It doesn't matter if they insult your character. In fact, I've heard this same Luke, who records these insulting things, he records Jesus saying, "Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you and when they," go ahead and say it, "and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven, for this is how their ancestors treated the prophets." Jesus knows what it's like to have people say all kinds of evil things about you. He showed us that when you see a crisis of people opposing you and slandering you, that's actually an opportunity for God's blessings to fill your life. When you feel powerless, you're actually being rewarded. I'm glad, again, it's not specific. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter how deep and cutting the insults are. You do not respond in kind. You respond kindly. So, that's how Jesus handles his trial, his opposition. Now we're going to shift and we're going to look at how Peter handled his hard time. How does he handle the pressure? Because remember, he's following Jesus at a distance. Many of you probably know this story. Peter is starting to deny Jesus. He's trying to do his own plan, his own thing. He's trying to work under his own power. Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. We know this is John. And because the disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, again, that's John, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. She said, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples too?" And Peter replied, "I am not." Ooh, one word too many. When Jesus was asked about who he was, Jesus said, "I am." When Peter was asked if he had this same identity, he said, "I am not." He has gone from fight in the garden, I'm ready to cut somebody's ear off. He's gone from fight to fright. He's gone from wanting to take on a small army of people, all armed with torches, to shielding himself from a servant girl. And here is his first lie. He decided to lie. While Jesus stood on truth in his opposition, Peter went directly to a lie. And you know which lie is the hardest? The first one. You know which lies start getting easier? The second, the third, the fourth. You know, you can get so good at lying that even you believe your lies. That's what habitual liars do. Lying gets easier the more you do it. And that's why this first lie, where Jesus is denied by Peter, is so dangerous. And usually when people lie, they have their own good reason. They justify their lie. Oh, I have to lie, because otherwise they may kick me out, whatever Peter's reason may be. Jesus would never ask you to do something against his nature in order to be in his presence. Peter could have spoken the truth, and Jesus still would have had everything in hand and in control. I like the way one of my professors, his name's Mark Moore, this is the way he put it. When Peter, why is he suffering so weirdly in the courtyard here? Why is he denying Jesus? Well, Jesus, if you looked at last week, Jesus had already wrestled with what was about to happen while he was in the garden. I like what the professor has to say. He says, because Peter was asleep in the garden, he was confused in the courtyard. Because Jesus had said, "Hey, Peter, why don't you stay awake with me so we can work through this together?" But what did Peter do? He fell asleep. So he wakes up and suddenly it's go time, it's fight time. He has not had the time that Jesus had to wrestle with the will of the Father. And so he's still confused with what that will is, and so he's still trying to do his own will. Are you trying to do your own will? Are you trying to get your own will accomplished in whatever opposition that you are facing? And then again, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. Awkward. He challenged him and said, "Didn't I see you with him in the garden? I'm pretty sure that the blood's still on your sword, Peter." Now we've got witnesses of all the people Peter could have been sitting next to at that charcoal fire to warm himself. It had to be a relative of the guy he assaulted. So now he's got positive ID. No, I saw you. I'm a relative of the guy that you assaulted. I know that had to be you. And what a perfect opportunity for Peter to have a testimony. He could have used that moment. He could have leveraged it and said, "Yes, I know, that was me. But look at what Jesus did to your relative. Look at how Jesus healed him. And yet now he's on trial. For what? For healing somebody?" He could have said, "Yeah, I am that person. But look at who Jesus is." But instead of leveraging the opportunity to talk about the healing power of Jesus, instead of talking about how Jesus healed some other man's skin, Peter was trying to save his own skin. He could have told him the story. He could have said, "This is exactly how it happened." He could have been an eyewitness and witness to the glory of Jesus, but instead, he denied it. And after a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away." And he began to call down curses upon himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Now, I love accents and dialects, and across the fruited plain, there are many of them. You got your Northeastern, right, which has plenty. There's New York, there's Boston, there's Baltimore. It's crazy. And then you get to the North, and you got the Minnesota, all that kind of stuff. And you get to Valley Girl on the West Coast, and Texas. I thought that I was getting into Southern territory here in North Central Arkansas. But did you know that there is a Deep South? Yeah. And you meet somebody from the Deep South and you make that face where you're like, I'm sure that 50% of that was English. And you try to understand what they're saying. I actually let a little bit of the South that is coming up, welling up in me. I've been here now since 2008. I let some of that slip out to some of my high school friends recently. I gave them a yuns, which is the new y'all, in case you didn't know. Yuns. And they were like, they said, what'd you just say, yuns? Oh, yeah, it's kind of like a you all kind of thing, yuns. And they just looked at me like, what are they doing to you down there? Are you okay? Do you need help? Blink twice. People stick out when they sound different. It should not have just been Peter's accent that sounded different to these people. It should have been the teachings of Jesus that came out of his mouth that made him sound different. I wish that the church would start sounding more different than the world so people can say, what you say gives you away, and how you say it gives you away. You've got a different dialect. You've got the dialect of the deity. And so whenever you speak, you sound completely different. When Paul, who was going to be writing later after the resurrection of Jesus, he actually saw Jesus resurrected and went from being a persecutor to being a church planter. And he would be in a city called Athens, and he was changing his language, and he was talking about the resurrection of Jesus, and people around him from the city came to him, and they wanted to know more. And look exactly what they said. They took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, a meeting of the minds, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears. Do you hear what they said? You sound different than anything we've ever heard before, Paul. What you say gives you away. You're not like every other idol worshiper around this place. And what that brought up in them was a curiosity. Tell me about your Christ. Tell me about something I have never heard before. Church, are we bringing some strange ideas to the ears of the world out there? Or are we sounding more and more like the world and they can't tell the difference? It's been said before, it's worth bears repeating. There was a trial where you were convicted of being a Christian. Would there be enough evidence? Enough evidence to convict you of being a Christian? I hope so. Because Peter had enough evidence to convict him of being a follower of Jesus, but he still denied it over and over again. So what do you do whenever you're facing opposition? Do you do what Jesus did? Do you stand boldly in the truth? Stay quiet when you need to stay quiet? Or do you tend to run your mouth, try to impose your own will, lie, deny? How do you tend to respond? Because this is how Jesus responds to Peter. Just as Peter was speaking, that last denial, the rooster crowed and the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. We often have a hard time picturing this scene because we're not in an ancient Israelite courtyard. Whenever we think of courts, we think that Jesus is on trial in this big stone building and Peter is outside trying to get in. But if Jesus was close enough to lock eyes with Peter, I'm sure he heard Peter call down the curses on himself. He heard every single denial and knew exactly where to find Peter. And Peter was calling down these kind of curses like, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. He was saying, may I be condemned if I were a follower of Jesus. I wonder if these other words would have popped into Peter's brain, because Jesus also said that whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. I wonder if that also was rolling around in the back of his mind. Peter was trying to keep control in the situation. He probably thought he was going to try to spring Jesus out of jail. We've got to get a plan together. Do you, whenever you're facing opposition, try to do your own plan, or do you submit yourself to whatever God's plan is? Because Jesus doesn't need you to be crafty. He doesn't need you to be clever. He doesn't need you to be powerful. He needs you to be obedient and willing and a servant. Because that's what Jesus did. Compared to what Peter did, what do you do when you're facing opposition and a crisis? God doesn't need you to be cunning. Peter was mounting a rescue mission. But his rescue mission was interrupting a much better rescue mission. So don't let your plan get in the way and thwart what God is doing. We need to have faith and submit to his plan. And notice, this verse doesn't give any outs. He doesn't say, whoever disowns me before others, unless they're really bad guys. Whoever disowns me in front of others, unless they're really trying to hurt you. If you disown him, he will honor the way you believe the relationship ought to go. But if you say, I claim him, he absolutely claims you. Another way to say it is this: when you feel powerless, don't forget that he is powerful. Has anybody in here ever felt like there was a situation beyond your control, out of your hands? The best situations are those that are out of your hands. I know that feels so weird to say. The best situations are the ones that are out of your hands, because then you have to fully admit that it's in his hands and there's nothing you can do. But if you trust him and his goodness, you know when the situation is beyond your control, we remember who really is in control. So Jesus knew this at his trial. Peter was forgetting it at his trial. We have a prayer team that's going to make their way right out those doors. And there's a room just outside in the hallway where they want to help you remember who is in control, who's really in control in your life. That's what prayer is. Prayer is saying, God, you are in control and I am not. So who are you in this today? Maybe you've lost your perspective. You're trying to maintain your power. You're like the religious leaders who are trying to hurl questions at Jesus. We are not the type of people that have the power to hurl questions and insults at Jesus. Maybe you're like Peter and you're trying to get your own will, get your own way, enforce it, and you're willing. The ends justify the means. I'll do whatever I have to get what I want. That is not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is the Father's will, no matter the cost to us. If you cling to control while hurling accusations and insults at other people, saying, if you are the Son of God, how could this happen in my life? You need to let go. Trust his plan. Peter would have a meeting later with Jesus after the resurrection. Peter would specifically be sat down with Jesus at another charcoal fire. And Jesus would ask him, do you love me? Peter would say yes. And then Jesus asked a second time, do you love me? And Peter would say yes. And then look what happens next. The third time, Jesus said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And that hurt Peter, because I think he knew why Jesus asked 3 times. It hurt him. Do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Maybe you're like Peter. And you've messed up, and you're thinking, wow, Peter, only 3 times? Rookie. I've messed up against Jesus a whole lot more than that. Can I tell you, it doesn't matter your number. The number that matters is that God has a grace that is more than any of your mistakes. And he can bring you back. After failing Jesus, Peter could have thought, I'm done. But Jesus simply asked this question, do you love me? So you have the chance to answer today, to give yourself over to prayer and say, I trust your power and your plan. Just saying those words out loud, you have the chance to say, yes, I love you, and I will die for you. I will reenact your death and burial right now. The question is clear. The question, the universal question that we all need to answer is, do you love Jesus? What do you do when the world feels like it's not in your control? You realize the blessing that he is in control. Let's pray. Father, we are so glad that we do not get our way, that we are not the ones who are in control, but we trust your plan, your power. And that is hard because we want to hold on to our cleverly devised schemes. But Lord, you are so much wiser and higher than all of us. Give us the perspective. Because whenever a crisis is happening, sometimes we lose our perspective so quickly in a panic, but increase our faith to trust. In Jesus' name we